Welcome to the SyrupCast. I'm Brad Bennett, and this is Canada's premier tech and gaming podcast. And today, we're talking all about the Game Awards from last week, and we're lucky enough to have Brad Shankar on the call. And he was actually a jury member at this year's awards and was at the show in person. So, Brad, how are you doing? Welcome back to Canada.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about the Game Awards. I'm a little sick. I was in LA twice for the Game Awards and then something else that I'll talk about later this week or by the time that this is published. So bear with me if I sound a little stuffy, please. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about the Game Awards. There's a lot of fun stuff.
And beyond having both Brads on the call, we also have Chris Brown, a MobileSyrup freelance contributor who has been around on this show many times before and also contributed on the website with a few gaming articles, reviews, regular coverage. And we're happy to have him back. Chris, are you happy to be back?
So happy to be back. I mean, some of the surprise announcements we're going to talk about are really exciting. And overall, I just think the Game Awards this year were really, really good. It felt like Jeff took the 10-year anniversary pretty seriously, took some of the criticisms he received in the past, and I think it was the best show they've ever done, honestly.
Nice. Yeah, you think that they really turned a page this year? I know last year they had some issues.
Yeah, last year was famous for the whole wrap it up situation where we got, people taking pictures on their phones of the award winners having to, maybe end their speech a little bit early. But I think Jeff did a good job of kind of addressing those criticisms. It felt like people had a little bit more time to talk. The announcements felt like they were handled really well. And, things like the Muppets poking fun at Jeff the entire show was a great bit to kind of undercut any of that tension and stuff. So yeah, no, I'm excited to hear what Brad thought, and I'm excited to hear about the announcements. It's going to be a good chat.
Yeah, honestly, Stalder and Waldorf, it's a mouthful, are like my favorite cameo bit. I think no matter when they pop up, I'm always like, oh, I love those guys. So I think that was really funny. But Brad, you were there in person. How was it to actually be there? Like, did you feel the same as Chris?
Yeah, we unfortunately I went with my friend Andrew, who contributes to the site. We had really poor seats, unfortunately, so there was like a camera operator like right in front of us, and so even like during the League of Legends or Arcane performance, like he was standing right in front of the first singer. Like I have a photo like perfectly blocking her. So, and then the way the stage like kind of folds out when they do the like orchestra and everything, like half of it was cut off. So that kind of soured the experience a little bit for me, just in terms of being there. But obviously, just the energy and the vibes are so much more heightened when you're there. Like the thing that people really popped off for the most, I would say, was Harrison Ford coming out, because Todd Howard and Troy Baker are doing that little bit, and you think, okay, they're alluding to Harrison Ford, but there's no way he's going to show up to the Game Awards. And then the curtain rises and he walks out, and he's clearly not sober, but it's great. He's happy. I mean, getting a compliment for Harrison Ford, no matter how half-hearted it might be, that's pretty cool. So good for them. But in general, yeah, I would agree with what Chris said. They definitely listened to feedback. Last year it was very much, so many celebrities cutting away from time for developers. And this year, I mean, Harrison Ford obviously is relevant to the Indiana Jones game, but it's also like he's a big enough name. I'll cut them some slack. That was a cool surprise. But for the most part, the celebrity appearances were kind of toned down and they felt more appropriate. Like last year we had like Simu Liu showing up. I mean, he was in the game, but he talked about his like broken leg for like 10 minutes.
He did talk about that leg for a while.
Yeah, and then like Timothée Chalamet presented Game of the Year, which was ridiculous because like, okay, he modded controllers 10 years ago, but on a YouTube channel, but he's not a game developer, right? Like they went back to the tradition of the director of the previous winner presenting Game of the Year. So in this case, it was Van Videke, which I thought was great. And proof of why that's important, because he gave such a beautiful speech about calling out a lot of the issues with the gaming industry and how it stifles creativity, and also taking a few fun shots at Jeff. Like he said he had time credits to caption from last year, which was such a great joke. So, and obviously for the developers, that means a lot too. Like I'm sure for the Astrobot team, getting the award handed to them by the guy who made Baldur's Gate 3 means a lot, right? So stuff like that is really good. And I think, there's always things you can criticize the Game Awards for, the balance of awards and announcements and everything. That's always something they kind of have to work out. But I will say, and Jeff, doing the show independently, he has like stakeholders that he can't, offend. So that's kind of the tricky balance to walk there. So I get that. So the most we're ever going to get from him, to his credit, which he did, is, if he can't outright call out companies except Konami. He can at least elevate other people's voices with this giant platform that he's, to his credit, has commendably created over 10 years. And I think the best example of that was with Amir Satvat, who won the inaugural Game Changer Award. So, there have been something like 30,000 people who have lost their jobs in the last 2 years in the gaming industry, which is awful. And of course, Jeff has never really said much, if at all, about that. But to his credit, at least giving a platform for someone like Amir, who has helped hundreds, if not thousands, of people find new work, all through volunteer stuff that he does. He has a great big LinkedIn presence, a lot of resources and tools that he provides to, displaced developers. I think that was a great initiative, and I hope to see more of that.
Cool. Yeah, no, it sounded really awesome. And you touched on that point there where you were saying it was potentially a better balance of like awards and trailers and stuff. I know from last year it was like felt really unbalanced. Like it was just like I felt like anyone with $100,000 could like slam their trailer in there. And that was better this year.
I think so. One thing that is interesting is Jeff usually hypes his shows up immensely beforehand. Of course, it makes sense. Yeah. But like he'll like every day he'll be like, this is going to be there. This is going to be there. He didn't do a lot of that this year, which is interesting because then I think there were a lot more surprises that way. Ending with Naughty Dog's game, The Witcher 4. I think that trailer went on way too long. I don't think we needed a 6-minute CG trailer for a game that's probably years out. That could have been maybe half the length, but that's still cool to see. I think more so it's it's the nature of the beast. You're not going to be able to service everything. I think my biggest criticism was just that Best Indie Game wasn't on stage. It was one of the awards that kind of Jeff rapid fired off to the side. Like Best Debut Indie was on stage, but not Best Indie, and I think that's not cool, right? Like
was Best Indie Balatro, if I remember.
Yeah.
Maybe they did it that way because he wasn't going to actually come on stage, right? He even at the app, he won like best game at the Apple Awards as well, and he just sent his like publisher in his place. So maybe they
but it went for best debut.
I get what you're saying,
and they still present. I mean, they don't know the winners beforehand, so they can't do that sort of thing.
You don't even think Jeff even knows to structure it a little?
He doesn't. No.
Oh, interesting. That's cool. That's interesting behind the scenes knowledge. And we were like, that's why we're excited to talk to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of things you can criticize Jeff Keighley for, but to his credit, he is not involved with the actual awards at all. Cool. Like in terms of like voting on them, prior knowledge or everything, he finds out what we do. So, cool. Yeah, that was something I feel like indies are the backbone of our industry, right? So they should absolutely get a stage platform. And
I think getting more and more important every single year. Like it's a growing
100%.
Like you said, a backbone of the industry for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the vein of the Witcher trailer, I was at a family potluck on Sunday, and my cousin was like, "Oh," he was like really hyped about it. We were like chatting about it. He's like, "I can't wait to play that. Like 1 or 2 years probably. They showed up that sick trailer," and I was like, "I wouldn't hold your breath for that one." And I like pulled up YouTube, and I was like, "This is when the first trailer came out for Cyberpunk." And it got released in 2020. I think it was 2013 to 2021 between the first trailer for Cyberpunk to the final release. So we're, everybody's got their fingers crossed that it's less than that amount of time, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is again, which I thought was hilarious.
I'm pretty sure CD Projekt only just said it went into full production.
Yep.
I think it was in pre-production for a while. So yeah, I would expect at least probably 3 years for that. And their team has been, juggling a bunch of different things. Like they're working on a second Cyberpunk. There's like a multiplayer thing that they're doing, a Witcher remake. So their team is, and then obviously they just shipped the Cyberpunk expansion last year. So they've been doing a lot of things. So
I think there was like another big update that came out recently for Cyberpunk too. Like I still think they keep adding stuff to that one.
They did a Balatro crossover too.
Yeah, they did. It seems like there was like 10 different crossovers added to Balatro.
No, but like, really they did that,
previously.
But then Balatro crossed over into Cyberpunk.
Oh,
as well.
Wait, what? I didn't know about that. Tell me about that.
Yeah, like you could like find, there was like a little quest in Cyberpunk that they added as part of that later update that you can like find the cards sort of thing. So
that's pretty cool actually. That might draw me back in. I've been thinking about trying to play Cyberpunk or The Witcher on my Mac with like crossovers just as like a nerdy little side project over the holidays, but we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens there, and we'll see if my download speeds can pull that together. I had in trouble with the show the first couple times, so that might be on the internet at my parents' house. But yeah, Brad. So what can you kind of share? Like, this was your first time being a jury member. I know you've been to the show before, but like, is there any kind of behind the scenes process of like how it was to become a jury member, or the stuff you had to do once you became a jury member? Like, now that the show has ended for this year, can you kind of walk us through some of like how that all came together?
Yeah. So first, just to be clear, technically it's the outlet as a whole that's the jury, not just me. So
For
it
sure,
is
but
mobile syrup.
you're a gaming editor. You spearheaded
Sure,
the thing.
but just
Yeah.
to stress that for people.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think Patrick O'Rourke was our old editor in chief, and he really spearheaded a lot of the gaming efforts on the site. So I think just kind of naturally through a lot of the work that he did, and then I kind of piggybacked on that, kind of got us on the radar of a lot of companies. And I would say, in earnest, the last 2 years is when I was really trying to, with his like backing, push to get us on the jury, because something that had always bothered me was Canada on the jury was Valnet is a Montreal based, no shade to people who work at the Valnet owned companies, but Valnet is a company based in Montreal, but they own a lot of sites that are predominantly American in terms of their audience and staff. So we're talking Screen Rant, Game Rant, etc. And in previous years, they would have their sites, again, which are predominantly owned and operated by American staff writers, representing Canada. Or one year they had The Gamer, which is mostly British people working there. And I like The Gamer. I like a lot of the people there. I like a lot of people that I've seen at Screen Rant. No shade to them, but you should not be representing Canada, right? I in the same way that I wouldn't feel comfortable representing Britain on the jury, right?
Yeah.
So that was always an issue for me, and I had been very vocal about that. So I don't know if that played a part in getting on their radar. But last year, I was told that we were kind of past the cutoff point, unfortunately, but they'll consider us for next year, and thankfully they did. So yeah, this year it was us, CG Magazine, and CBC in terms of Canadian outlets. So that's cool.
Which I think is important because there's a lot of gaming stuff that happens in Canada,
Yes.
like Montreal, Ontario, like all over. There's even like the Balatro guys from Canada somewhere, someplace we don't know, but there's a lot that goes on here. I think we definitely punch above our weight class in terms of like media in general, but especially in gaming.
Yeah, 100%. And Jeff himself is Canadian as well.
Yep.
He's from
Oh,
Markham,
yeah, I always forget
Ontario,
about
which
that.
is a lot of people do, right? Which is
Yeah.
funny. So, in terms of the process, I think I don't know how much of the behind the scenes stuff I can reveal, but a lot of the gaming industry, they talk with one another. They have a lot of overlap, and I know a lot of the publishers will ask the companies here, like Nintendo, PlayStation, etc., like, who do you think would make most sense on the jury? So I think we've, again, with the help of Patrick and other people we've had, we've built up a great relationship with a lot of these publishers. So when the Game Awards goes to ask them, they would say, oh, I think Mobile Syrup would be a good fit. So I think that really helps with us.
I think you've
and
deepened
a lot
it a
of
lot
those
this year.
Yeah, and a lot
You
of
did
those
great
publishers
interviews,
are
and you got
represented
the
by
quote in the Astrobot trailer. Like you're going up.
Yeah, and a lot of those publishers are represented by like the same sort of PR folks, so that there's kind of that overlap as well. And yeah, I think that's sort of how we joined. Did you want to talk about the sort of process of it, like of
Yeah,
actually
if we could
deliberating?
go into, and I think Chris, you were part of the voting a little bit too. Like we all were, right? Chris, you were. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think
a little bit, yeah.
We're kind of curious about. I think maybe people might be curious about like how many stages of that. Like, do they give you like 10 games that you vote on, or do you like throw out whatever games that you think might deserve each category? Like, how does that kind of settle into? How do we end up with the games that get nominated and then voted in at the actual awards?
Yeah, so to their credit, they're very hands-off. Like, when you first join, they send like a giant PDF sort of outlining all the categories and the key dates you need to know about and that sort of thing. But they're not ever like pressuring you or to do any particular thing, and they're very clear about if certain publishers are reaching out to you more than others, let us know, because they're not supposed to sort of be bribing you or harassing you to vote for them, sort of thing. Like this year, one of the new things was they opened up for your consideration events, like they do for like the Oscars or Emmys, sort of thing, where they might hold a virtual event, or like in LA, they might hold like a cocktail mixer where you'll hear from the creatives to kind of pitch you why their movie or TV show is worthy of your nomination, your vote. And so this year, publishers were able to do that, but the rule was like it has to be virtual, so it's anyone can attend, because obviously if you're juror
cool.
in China, it might be hard to attend one in LA. So not a lot did that. A few did, but that was their choice if they wanted to or not. But yeah, for the most part, the Game Awards is really just like, these are the jurors, and they send your information off to each publisher, and then it's up to them if they want to, reach out and offer codes to you, because That's the biggest thing. Some of the games, because of the cutoff period, like Dragon Age, for instance, came out on Halloween, which is like right before the cutoff period for the Game Awards. So like realistically, unless you were reviewing that game, you would not have had enough time with it to judge it. And that's unfortunately, again, the nature of the beast, where because all the publishers want the Game Awards in December, they have to have the cutoff in like the middle of November. So that means games are always left out. The big one this year is Indiana Jones. A lot of people really love that game, and that came out like first week of December, so it just missed the cutoff. So that'll be eligible for next year. As cool. Game Awards. And that happens famously with Smash Bros. As well. Smash Ultimate. That came out like December 6th, so it was eligible for 2019 Game of the Year, which is hilarious. But I think we had basically 2 months from when we knew that we were a juror to, submit our nominations, like the games we would want nominated in each category. One thing I did appreciate is they have a specialized juror for jury for like the esports / content creator categories and accessibility, which is
that's
great
cool.
because I don't feel comfortable judging on any of those. Especially accessibility. People with actual disabilities should be. And Steve Saylor, who's also Canadian, he's one of that jury, and he's fantastic. You should check out his work. And there's a lot of other great people on that jury, so I appreciate that. And they are very clear about like if you don't feel comfortable filling out a category, don't. Because that is one issue with the Game Awards. It is a jury of over 130 global media outlets from however many different countries, and so there's not really specialized sites necessarily voting. So whereas with like a lot of awards shows in Hollywood, there are people who are actually from those particular technical categories voting. So there is at least a bit more of an informed opinion sort of thing. But here it's just kind of someone who might just have a general gaming site has to vote on best VR game, right? And they might not have even touched a VR game. So they'll either, what they should do is abstain, but I think sometimes they'll still vote. And so we'll run into a situation, same thing with like sports games. I think most games media probably doesn't care about sports games. So then we run into the same thing where they just vote for FIFA or EA Sports, as it's now called, every year, even though like the people who play it probably tell you it's not very good, but they'll still vote for it just because it's the most recognizable name, right? So I think that's one of the issues there. And I think
so.
Before
we move on to the next bit. So it's only critics really that vote beyond those 3 categories you mentioned. There's not like industry, like game developers or people that work on the teams. So it's not like the Oscars.
No.
That's interesting. I thought there was a section of like insiders, we'll call them, that did have a vote, but that's cool to know. And I do think critics know a lot, as we all are here in our studio. Anyway, sorry, continue.
And I was just going to say, I think one thing, the categories are pretty loosely defined, which I think runs into a lot of issues, where the big controversy this year was Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree being up for Game of the Year, because admittedly, the rules have always allowed for an expansion. They just have never had to really promote or enforce it, because there's never really been one that's...
Didn't the Witcher expansion get up one year?
It wasn't up for Game of the Year. It was up for Best
okay.
RPG, which I know Dean Daly, our colleague, really was salty about that. But so that there's no kind of restrictions against that, or even in situations like because the gaming industry is obsessed with remakes and remasters, and there's not really any firm rules or restrictions against. Like, they want you to consider those. That's what like the guidelines for the jury says. But there's no like for instance, like the Oscars. I don't know the exact percentage, but like if you're doing a sequel to a movie, like the soundtrack, like Hans Zimmer did Dune 1 and Dune 2. There's like a certain percentage of new songs he has to have in Dune 2 for it to be eligible for for best score. And I think this year it actually wasn't eligible because I think he reused too many songs, I think was the issue. But there's no such restrictions like that. So for the Game Awards, you can have something like Silent Hill 2 Remake, which by all accounts is way better than anyone expected it to be, but it's using pretty much the same soundtrack, right? And it was still up for best music. So I'm like, or best story, right? Like, obviously there's no mathematical formula to how much is new versus how much is old sort of thing. So you kind of have to play it by ear with that. But it does run into situations where, like big remakes like that are kind of dominating some categories, or expansions are dominating some categories. Last year, one of the big controversies was indie game was Dave the Diver, was one of the nominations, which is it has an indie vibe in terms of like the presentation and the budget sort of thing, but it was made by a big Chinese conglomerate, right? So it's like it's not an independent game necessarily. So stuff like that, that's something I think the Game Awards can do a better job of maybe tightening those categories a bit, because it does feel a bit loose. And sometimes we'll get things that shouldn't be nominated, arguably.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, that's very cool. So, how did you go about, like, I guess not necessarily how did you go about, but like, did you really struggle with trying to pick your at least game of the year? Like, how many games did you have in your personal pool before you're like, okay, I got to narrow it down to the ones I'm going to nominate? Because I know you had a pretty big list when you were like going through it, and we had that Google Doc. We were all kind of like sharing.
Yeah. So for full transparency, yeah, Chris did help us out a bit, and I roped in again my friend Andrew, who was at the Game Awards with me as well, because they've played a lot of games this year. Especially the big one for me was it was between like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Metaphor ReFantazio are my two favorite games of the year, and I obviously come at Final Fantasy VII with a nostalgic lens, a big bias, because that's my favorite game of all time. So I didn't want to be the only one voting on that. I wanted to, see what others thought about those two games, so it's not just me. So that's so in situations like that, I really liked to have other people to kind of weigh in, check my biases a little bit, and that sort of thing. But as a whole, I think just trying to. There's a lot of like sites that cover indie games, and so going through a lot of those, making sure I didn't miss. Like in the last few months, some of the indie games that I caught up on a lot of indie games, especially like Mouthwashing was one, which was fantastic. Still Wakes the Deep, Nobody Wants to Die, that Chris shouted out, which is like a cyberpunk noir adventure game. So yeah, just kind of seeing what fell through the cracks. And part of what I love about those indie games is they're all only a few hours each, so it's like you can get through a lot of them in the time it would take you to beat one Metaphor ReFantazio sort of thing. So just trying to making sure, because the indie games, unfortunately, because this is sort of like a populist vote sort of thing, they tend to not get a lot of love. So I can't affect what the other jurors are going to do, but I want to at least do my part and try to do my due diligence and try to play as many of the indie games as possible and kind of make a good case for those. So
I mean, speaking of the other jurors, Chris, and I guess, well, Andrew's not here, but did you and Andrew kind of align with Brad's like top games, or were you guys trying to push like where were you kind of leaning towards? What I guess, for lack of a better term, what brought you the most joy this year in terms of games?
Yeah, I think Brad and I tend to align taste-wise a lot of the time. We both, skew towards single-player experiences and a lot of RPGs. I think we both grew up playing, Japanese RPGs as opposed to Western RPGs. And so, in my teen years, that was kind of a realignment to, oh, right, Bethesda and, The Witcher was a big one to kind of, oh, wow, okay, Western devs have really, pushed towards a whole different side of the storytelling kind of. I don't know how to phrase that, but yeah, it's like they're very different. So I think having multiple people kind of pitch in really does help to balance everything out. And even though we align in taste, I think we have different games that really spoke to us. I've always been someone who really gravitates towards the Persona games. I know, Brad, you do too. And I would say that I have been more on the Persona side than the Final Fantasy side in some ways over the years. And then this year with Metaphor and Final Fantasy, I was like, oh, but Final Fantasy Rebirth, like we kind of, I would say, aligned very closely where those were the two top experiences. In terms of some of the other picks, yeah, I think we played a few different indie games than each other. But, even in the indie game category, I think 1000 X Resist was a game that really caught me off guard. And when I heard Brad had also played that, it was like, okay, well, that's an easy nomination for us to put forward, because it felt
Canadian
like
too.
Canadian game.
Oh, cool.
And really interesting messages about diversity, and not in a way that feels like it's in your face, just really a beautiful experience to play through. Very, very unique. In terms of some other ones, yeah, I know I played Stellar Blade, so I had a perspective on that, and some other games that I tend to play that were a little bit more multiplayer focused, I had some opinions on. But overall, I think we did largely align. I don't think there were any big surprises or anybody getting into a fist fight over not having something nominated. Generally, I would say they were pretty closely aligned.
Cool. I know Brad had mentioned earlier that, Indiana, or not Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford coming out in the show during the Indiana Jones bit was like a big surprise for him. When you were watching it at home, did anything kind of catch you off guard? Cameo or just even awards in particular, like some award that you were like, oh, this is a lock, and then somebody else won it.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of surprises this year. I think the biggest one for me personally was Okami 2. I would have never expected that on a number of levels. Like, we knew Hideki Kamiya had left Platinum, but we also knew that he wasn't going to be able to work for a bit. So then to find out that not only had he gone back to Capcom to create Clover's studio, which is an homage to Clover, the fact that he chose to do Okami. And it's funny because I had just finished watching Unseen is the studio that came from... Oh, I'm going to blank on her name. She was the developer on Ghostwire Tokyo.
Ghostwire.
And she ended up leaving, creating her own studio. And he went and had a conversation with her. And a large part of that video was all about Okami and what it was like to work on that project and how much they loved it, but how difficult it was. And so I had finished watching that just mere weeks ago. So to have Okami 2 announced was incredible. I think the other probably big announcement, one of my probably top 5 games of all time is Shadow of the Colossus. And so
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
getting the announcement,
Yes.
there's not even a name for the game yet. I think it just said like Project
It's like
Robot.
Project
something.
Robot.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's not, it's nowhere close probably. We know that team likes to take their time, but I just, that is something that, again, it completely aligned with my own tastes. I tend to fall into that sci-fi category. Mood-wise, you cannot beat that studio. Their games just have such a, I don't know, heart-rending vibe to them, even though they're so minimal in their approach. So I would say those are the two.
Did they do Journey as well, or am I misremembering that?
No.
That's a separate studio. They did The Last
Okay, my
Guardian,
bad.
Eco, and Shadow
Right.
of the Colossus.
Shadow of the Colossus.
Yeah, those are the.
This is
kind of
how,
the three.
to your point of us aligning, that was my number one as well.
Your number one
like,
surprise,
I
too?
Yeah, like Shadow of the
Yeah.
Colossus is probably a top 5 for me as well, and I adore that game. And yeah, so just seeing that, and it was actual gameplay too, which is nice.
Yeah.
And it looked very much like in the Colossus vibe. It was the person like climbing up the back
Yeah.
of the robot. Like it looked like they were kind of maybe harkening back, or maybe it's a spiritual successor in a way. I mean, they didn't show a lot, but the small guy and the giant like creature robot in this case was like very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And then in terms of awards, I think there probably was only one award that I would say really caught me off guard, and I'm trying to think of what it was now. It wasn't anything crazy. I would say for the most part, everything kind of fell where I expected it to. But yeah, I think, I do wish that a few games maybe got a few more nods. But that also just comes down to personal taste. I don't think there were any crazy surprises like Game of the Year going to something that everybody was just completely blown away by. Elden Ring didn't win. If that had won, I think we would be having a very different conversation.
Fair enough.
That or
Anything beyond
Wukong.
what you've said so far, Brad, that kind of caught you off guard? I know you've mentioned a few things already, but just anything else?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm a big Final Fantasy guy. Seeing Clive in Tekken 8 was pretty cool. Because there was a lot of people have wanted Tifa from Final Fantasy 7, and that instead, and so many people have asked about that to the point where like the Harada, the head of Tekken, had to like address it on Twitter. So there was a lot of like speculation going in that it's going to be Tifa, and then sure enough, it was a Final Fantasy character, but just not Tifa. And hey, I love Clive. I like 16 a lot. Ben Starr is amazing. I run into him literally every time I'm in LA, and that man is amazing. I love that man so much. So yeah, good for him. Good for that character. That's cool. I'm happy that Naughty Dog is doing a new IP. I like The Last of Us a lot. I love The Last of Us, but I'm tired of The Last of Us. It's there's the obligatory, we have to re-release that game or retell that story every year, it feels like. And sure enough, we got The Last of Us 2 remastered PC port announced during there, so they had to have their requisite Last of Us something. And that's probably, they said April for that, which would be around the time of the season 2 of the show, so that's actually smart. But I'm just, it's their first new IP in over 10 years, so it's like, I'm glad it's something new. I'm excited for that. Curious to see more. I mean, the trailer obviously didn't show us much. Like, obviously, it was in engine, but we didn't see any gameplay really. It just, other than teasing some sort of melee combat, which is interesting because they haven't really done that. I mean, The Last of Us has like punchy sort of melee combat, but it's obviously not focused on that. So it'll be interesting to see. There was a lot of like interesting like cameos in the photos. Like Kumail Nanjiani was there.
Yeah.
Tony Dalton from Better Call Saul.
Yep.
I'm like, okay, there's some interesting cast members here. So we'll see. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me with that announcement was that Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor doing the soundtrack. I'm like, that is
let's go.
I mean, especially after the power of challengers, it's like, give me more of that. Give it put
Hell
in
yeah.
the game. I'm so down.
Yeah. That was honestly the coolest part of that announcement for me. I'm like, them doing like a sci-fi thing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm really curious to see what they're going to bring to that.
How do we feel about all of the brands in the trailer? The Porsche,
that was a little weird.
I'm not sure how I feel about it. I like that they're trying to ground it, I guess, in like realism. I think the nod to like the Sony stereo felt a little on the nose, especially. But the Porsche was cool, and they said, I was reading an interview where he was talking a lot about how like Akira inspired it, and then you could see when you compare like the red Akira motorcycle to like the red Porsche, and I was like, oh, there's like a lot, like they really went for it there, so that was kind of fun. But it'll be interesting to see how like heavy-handed it is in the actual game, I guess.
Yeah, he said the two biggest inspirations were Akira and Cowboy Bebop, which I mean, like those are two of the best animes. So like if you're gonna draw from anything, those are two good ones. But yeah, we'll see. I'm intrigued by it. I haven't seen enough to blow me away. It certainly wasn't not one of my favorite things of the show, but I'm intrigued.
I am curious.
I'm with you, Brad. As much as I like The Last of Us, I'm like, do I want another game where I just have to like be really sad killing people? You know, like I want something a little more exciting. Like I would be happy if we went back to Uncharted. I'm a huge Uncharted fan, but yeah, the Last of Us 2 to me, as amazing as it was, it just felt like this is getting really intense. And how do we go? Like, do we have to try to top this? Do we try to like pivot it? I don't know what the third one brings or how they like circle that back. But if it's like, you know, as violent as the last one, it's gonna have to be even more violent, which I think is gonna be crazy and maybe too much.
Well, and this one looks like it's fairly combat oriented, with her kind of pulling out the sword at the end and leaping off of a rock. It's not in the Naughty Dog wheelhouse, really, at least not in the last few games. Like this is probably more in the Jack and Daxter realm than it is either Uncharted or The Last of Us.
Good point.
So, interesting.
Yeah, that should definitely be very exciting. But yeah, okay, I guess kind of moving on. A lot of people, I mean, I don't think any of us were that surprised, but a lot of people online have been very upset / surprised that Astrobot ended up winning Game of the Year. How do you guys feel about that one? I know you were saying you were more on the JRPG side with your wants for winning, but do you think Astrobot like kind of fell rightfully into place, or was it kind of you're not sure how to feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, my prediction was that Astrobot was going to win. I think it's you know, in Hollywood they talk about the sort of 4-quadrant movie where it sort of appeals to like the 4 major demographics.
Yeah.
And Astrobot is basically that for gaming. Like it hits all criteria. It's an immaculate platformer that kind of harkens back to sort of Mario style design quality. It's very unique in the PlayStation ecosystem, where they haven't done a platformer in so many years. They're pretty much just known for the sort of AAA cinematic third-person action-adventure game now. It obviously celebrates PlayStation's history, so there's a nostalgia angle, 30 years of PlayStation with, you know, I think 150-plus bots from different games and franchises. And then it's an all-ages game, right, which PlayStation hasn't really had either. Like, a lot of their games are either T for teen or M for mature.
Yeah.
And I think so all 4 of those sort of coming together, it's one of those things where, and you talk about it in other awards things as well, it might not be everyone's absolute favorite thing of the year, but it would be on enough people's lists, like high up on enough people's lists that it would, you know, it didn't surprise me that it would come. And also just logistically, it's a 12 to 15 hour game. Like it took 15 hours to platinum that game to do 100%. So just realistically, way more people are going to play Astrobot because it's shorter versus Rebirth, which is at least 40 hours, if not more, and Metaphor, which is at least 70 hours, if not more. Yeah. Right. So it just has much more appeal in that sense. So that doesn't surprise me. And to be honest, I think it's a well-deserved win. You know, it's high up there on my list. MobileSyrup's gonna publish our top 10 games of the year shortly. Astrobot's gonna be on there. It's well-deserved. It's a great game. I think it's, and I think we can't ignore also it's been a pretty shitty year in a lot of ways. So I think people wanted something like, if you talk about pure unadulterated joy, that is what Astrobot is. Like every moment of that game, you have a smile on your face, and I think that it's going to resonate with people, especially given the sort of times we're in. So I think it's a good winner. I have nothing against it. And I think it sends a good message too, in the sense that not only is it fresh within the PlayStation catalog, but it's also had a really good development cycle. Like, it was made in 3 years. It was a mid-sized team of about 65, 70 people, which is not big by any means. It had a budget, I think, of like 60, 70 million dollars, which again, for like a marquee PlayStation exclusive, is really good, because like Spider-Man 2 cost like $300 million. The Last of Us 2 cost like $200 million. Game budgets are blowing way out of proportion. And that's why games take so long to make. And then when they don't sell 25 million copies, then they have to lay people off, right? So I think Astrobot's a great model of, they had a vision. And they executed it really well. And they there wasn't, as far as we know, there wasn't any sort of crunch on the project. The team, they retained a lot of the team members who worked on the previous Astrobot games. It's just all around a great success story, I think. Cool. Yeah, I'm happy it won. I have nothing against that. Not my favorite game of the year, but it's a well-deserved win, I think.
But I think that's important. It can't always be your favorite. Like you said, it has to kind of hit the 4 quadrants, and there's something to be said about that. Like, Chris, you can answer in a second, but like, just for me, I don't have a PlayStation, but that's like one of the games I've been wanting to play the most, because like you said, it just looks so joyful, and like, just like I can sit down for a couple of days and play this like really fun platforming game, and like, it's the anti-Last of Us, where I don't have to worry about killing some dude named Mark and he's gonna like cry as I kneecap him, and I can just go in and like bounce around and like find all these like little hidden treasures. And I think one thing to me that seems really intriguing about it too is it has like really amazing like DualSense controls, which I think is actually like a pretty big innovation on its own too. As I know lots of games are taking advantage of it, but I think that is really interesting. Anyway, Chris, what do you think about it? Taking the big trophy home.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because so here at MobileSyrup, I for a long time I pushed for us to do fantasy draft, and unfortunately, just with the changes that happened this year, we didn't probably get to finish that. But I also do a fantasy draft with a few friends of mine, online and stuff. And the moment that Astrobot was announced, I grabbed it. I was like, okay, well that game is mine. We do a draft two times a year, and no one else was even interested in Astrobot. And I was like, great, okay, that means I get to steal it. But that also kind of gave me an inside look at how other people view it. Now, most of my friends are more PC gamers than console gamers, but they kind of looked at it and they went, oh, well, I'm not really into that kind of game unless it's Mario. And even the other day, I was at a night playing some board games with some friends, and they were all like, can you believe Astrobot won? And I was like, yes, I can. But it was interesting getting that perspective of, they had no interest in this kind of game. They view it as a kid's game. So unless it's a Nintendo game, many people just kind of write it off because it's not what they're looking for from these brands. And I think that is kind of supported a little bit by, the audience pick at the Game Awards, which went to Black Myth, and all of the other games were very much either gacha games or something in that vein. And that's what people tend to play these days. And it is why, we are having people push so far towards live service. And this is kind of, the antithesis to that, right? So interesting in that way. Personally, I love Astrobot. The reason that I picked it up so quickly is when I got my PS5, that was the first thing that I played because it came with it. Such a smart move. Great use of the DualSense, as you said. I think the only other game that even comes close to rivaling it is probably Returnal, which has some really smart mechanics built around like half trigger pulls. And so it kind of like half locks, and then you have to pull through that. So it's a really clever way to reload and use different abilities and stuff. And it feels great in that game too. But Astrobot is, it's the king in that way. And so when this was announced, I was like, yeah, great. And it landing timing-wise, perfect for me. Had a pretty rough September. Jumped in there. It was the perfect game to play through. Yeah, I think I beat the entire game in 2 or 3 sittings. It was, that just unadulterated joy. So I was actually very happy it won, even though it wasn't my personal pick as well. It was there were 3 games that I was like, if any of these win, I will be happy, and that was one of them.
And I'll just say, you bring up a great point. Yeah, I think general audiences who don't play games as much might not resonate as much with them. And like even just looking at the sales, in the first 2 months, it only sold 1.5 million copies, which for a PS5 exclusive, especially the biggest one this year, other than, I guess, Helldivers, isn't a lot. But so my point more about it kind of resonating with everyone is to give some context. The people voting on the Game Awards, 90% of the vote comes from the jury. So
Yes.
yeah, the 10%, only 10% is from the public. So yeah, the 10% of the public, most of them probably weren't voting for Astrobot. But for me, I had a feeling Astrobot would win because I'm obviously very tuned into the media space. A lot of my colleagues, seeing what they said, all of them were high on Astrobot.
Yep.
And I knew that they were the ones who were going to be voting. So for the vast majority of that, so I figured that was why I figured Astrobot would win. But yeah, you bring up a great point where they did have a sort of uphill battle in the sense that, yeah, there was this sort of unfortunately silly perception that it is a kid's game and, it's not.
Those people have
I'm not saying from your friends, but just in general.
Like those side levels, some of those are brutally difficult, especially doing the speedrunning challenges. Holy. Give those a try and then come back and tell me it's a kid's game.
Yeah, some of them. And then they've done some really cool post-launch free DLC as well, where they added new stages and characters. Yeah. Rayman was in one of them. I'm like, yay, finally, Ubisoft remembered Rayman exists. They added Spider-Man and both Peter and Miles as well. Like, stuff like that. It's really cool. But yeah, just to add on to that. But yeah, I agree with everything you said otherwise, Chris.
Have you guys played, I'm assuming you must have, but have you guys played Black Myth? I feel like most of the contention I'm seeing is Black Myth versus Astrobot. How did that one stack up for you guys? And just outside of it not winning awards or not.
I mean, again, talking about like perception, like and critics versus fans sort of thing. Like Black Myth is the second lowest rated game on Metacritic of any Game of the Year nominee in the 10 years that the Game Awards has been around. I forget what the lowest one was, but that gives you an idea that critics were not as hot on the game. Like they thought it was fine. It's all right. And it was mostly the public that was really going to bat for that game. And again, that sort of thing is very heavily skewed towards Asia, specifically China, right? Like and of course, rightfully so. It's a celebration of their culture and journey to the West and all that. I get it, but that is obviously very skewed, and that is a good illustration of why I think the Game Awards is smart to let the fans vote, but not heavily so, because then you're going to get it sort of rigged like that. And then we've even seen in other cases where for the player's choice, the Genshin Impact, which first of all is like a 4-year-old game, so why is it on there anyways? But the developers will release incentives, like if you vote for us, we'll do this, and I'm like, that's not cool, right? Like we're going to do this in the game and give free gems or whatever. I'm like, no, that's kind of gaming the system. So yeah, I think. But it's funny because like the CEO of Game Science that made Black Myth was like crying about not winning, and I'm like, come on, dude, like. You sold like it's like that Mad Men gif where John Draper's like, that's what the money's for. It's like, bro, you're like the best-selling game of the year, and you got like an 82 on Metacritic. By all accounts, your game is a success. Relax.
Yeah, nominations still count for something.
Yeah, and I do just want to add a little bit of context there. Like, those comments that are circulating were machine translated. There's no accounting for tone, Sure. So I do just want to put that out there that no one's quite sure what his intentions were with those comments, because I think the quote that was circulating is like, why did I even come here? It was something along those lines, expressing disappointment. But, he has been known to make very facetious comments or kind of like joking comments in the past that interview-wise have been taken out of context. So I just want to add that as a little bit of extra.
Good to know.
But yeah, I agree where I did end up beating Black Myth Wukong. I enjoyed it, but even in terms of best action game of the year, I wouldn't vote for it. I think Stellar Blade, the mechanics were tighter. It did more interesting stuff across its experience. Black Myth, I liked the story because we honestly don't get many Chinese stories in video games. It is interesting now that we are getting more. I think a big part of that was Sony's investment into what they called the Hero Project. And so they invested in a bunch of Chinese developers about 4 or 5 years ago, and we're starting to see some of that come to fruition. But also, they are just pushing more into the video game scene. But it is kind of refreshing after having so many years of Western developers kind of dominating the industry, especially in the PS3 into PS4 era. Now we are getting Japanese developers kind of coming back in a big way, especially Capcom and Atlas games and that sort of stuff. It's always good good to get new voices, and I think we're seeing that with both South Korea. I mean, obviously South Korea has been a big player in the MMO space for a long time, but starting to get things like Stellar Blade, it does feel fresh. It feels unique because the way they tell their stories is just different. And so to have Black Myth, I think, is a really good inclusion to have it at the Game Awards, but to expect it to win, it's I think safely to say a 7 or 8 out of 10. I don't think many people are saying it's a 10 out of 10, except for the people who really only played Black Myth. I do know some people who really liked the game. It is a Souls-like. It's a fairly safe Souls-like, and it doesn't have the world's strongest mechanics. So yeah, I understand that people really like the game, but I do think that's where media does come in. I think there is a certain level of literacy that has to be looked at from a broad perspective of people who play a lot of games. Because a lot of my friends who are making those same comments about, Astrobot are the same people who play Path of Exile 2, and that's the game they're going to play for the next 6 months until they pick up another game. So they don't play a broad a broad range of games to compare other experiences to.
Fair enough. Yeah,
That's a great point.
That makes sense. Yeah. Moving back into kind of the behind the scenes of the voting, Brad, how do you go about voting for things like direction? Or wait, sorry. How do you go about for voting things like game direction and games for impact when you try to take into account those awards? Does game direction differ a lot from Game of the Year to you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I love movies, and I'm really tuned into that space, and I watch a lot of movies. So I kind of liken it to, I guess, best director sort of thing with the Oscars versus best picture, and those don't always align. They often do, but they don't always. For me, I kind of view best game direction as like you had a singular vision, and how well did you execute on it? Like, and how well does like each facet of the game kind of contribute to that larger vision? Like. For full context, I thought Astrobot was a perfect example of that, where they had a very clear vision of making just a very tightly designed platformer that is just oozing creativity and charm, and everything is firing on all cylinders to support that vision, whether it's like you said, the DualSense features, or the level design, or the sound design, or the little character cameos, or the music. Everything is just firing on all cylinders and supporting that vision very well. Another one that I really thought as well was Thousand Times Resist, like that Chris shouted out. I think that is an example of it had a very clear vision. This is a team, I said they were Canadian, they're former performance artists in Vancouver. It's a very small team. The core team is only 4 people, and so this is their first time making a game, and this is why I like the sort of behind the scenes knowledge of how games are made, because it's like their knowledge was stage direction, right? Like you're using the same setting to tell a story. Obviously you're moving props around and stuff like that, but it's still the same setting. So basically they just kind of took that and applied that to a game. So it's like you're in largely revisiting the same settings, but you're jumping through different time periods. So that's kind of how this whole stage direction sort of plays out, which I think is very fascinating. And I think when you think of it from that perspective, like how well they executed, okay, you're coming back to this area in this timeline, but now it's shot like a Wong Kar-wai In the Mood for Love movie, or you're going back in this setting and it's like a side scroller, kind of like what Nier Automata would do in one instance. And it's like
That's
stuff like
cool.
that, I think is like you can see the vision. Like if they had like an audio commentary, like I could totally see him distilling all of this in such immaculate detail. And so that's the sort of thing I look for with game direction. Whereas, you're talking about Black Myth Wukong, like, yeah, again, solid game, but like I couldn't really tell you what the direction was there, the vision. Like it was just sort of, we're drawing from different Chinese mythology and it's a boss rush mode, but I can't really tell you, what the sort of direction is there. Games for impact, I always feel complicated about this category because it does feel like a consolation. It feels like a consolation prize in a lot of ways. It's the idea that like your game, and it's basically designed to give indies that wouldn't get the recognition in major categories, give them like a consolation prize, basically. Which, cool. First of all, as a definition, it's such a weird thing because AAA games have big, pro social images messages too. Like Metaphor of ReFantasio is like one of the wokest games this year. Final Fantasy VII is a very woke game, right? So those could technically be games for impact, but it generally is just, indie games. So I feel a little, but for that one, I sort of thought about what is the message that they're trying to send and how universal and important it is. For me, I thought that was Tales of Kenzara Zao, because it's not only is it celebrating African culture, which is something that not a lot of games do, like not just black people, but African culture specifically. But it's a story, it's this very earnest and sincere story about this guy who lost his dad at a very young age, and he's sort of processing his grief through the game, which I think if you come at it from either perspective, there's a universality to it. But on the flip side, Neva, beautiful game, touched me as well. Was weeping by the end of that game. I lost my dog last year, so that was a big part of it. But that game, if you're a parent or you're a pet owner, really resonates with you as well. So you could make the argument that, and it did win Games for Impact, which was great. Happy for them. So yeah, it's a little tricky. I do wish, again, that kind of feeds back to the larger issue of I wish more indie games were just recognized on a larger scale, so then we wouldn't necessarily need to have a Games for Impact sort of category. But that's sort of my thought process, working within those sort of limited categories.
Yeah, it'd be almost cool if they split it up like AAA and indies as kind of like movies and TV is split in kind of media awards. Like giving them each a sort of time in the spotlight and a separate playing, like a more balanced playing field for each one, perhaps. But yeah, I think we went through most of my other questions here. I guess, Chris, you mentioned, I think you said Metaphor and Final Fantasy were your top 2 games. Are there any other games you kind of want a lightning round shout out? I know Brad did a lot in our last episode where we were just talking about our favorite things of the year, but do you have anything else you think people should really check out? And people have time off over the holidays. It's a good time to game. I've been playing Echoes of Wisdom this week. It's been really fun. So what do you got?
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, my favorite game of the year actually was nominated for a couple awards, but not for Game of the Year. It was one that caught me off guard, even though I've played every game in the series now. And that is Like a Dragon: Infinite Wealth.
Oh, the Yakuza game?
Yeah, man. It's been so interesting because I picked those games up for the first time with the release of Yakuza 0 back in 2017. And since then, I've played through all of them because they just have this perfect balance of goofy side quests and a really serious main narrative, great characters, really fun gameplay that you can kind of get lost in for however much time you want. So a lot of those games you can kind of get through in 30 to 40 hours. So still a time investment.
Oh, that's not too bad.
But you can play them.
It's not 70,
Well, that's it, right? And then some of them you can I think I have about 150 hours in Infinite Wealth this year. And that's not needed. It's 40 hours to go through the main narrative, but to do all of the side content, there's an entire almost Animal Crossing like city builder in there. You can invest as much time as you want. And I think the reason that this one really caught me off guard, I've always enjoyed the gameplay in the Yakuza games, but the switch over to turn-based with 7, which was Yakuza Like a Dragon, I liked the combat in 7. It is so improved here that this is now far and away my favorite combat system in any of the Yakuza games. And this also has my favorite party of any game in probably 5 or more years. Pyre is probably the only one up until Persona 4. Like, if I think about like Final Fantasy 11 level parties, Final Fantasy 7 is infamous and probably stands out even amongst Final Fantasy games as having the best core party. You've got Barret, Tifa, Aerith, all of the great characters. Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth for me is that. It has this amazing growth of characters. You start as enemies with some of them and twists and turns and all of that. That's the game that I would shout out because I think you can pick it up. You don't need to know anything going into it. You'll get more out of it if you know Kiryu's backstory, and if you've played the last one, sure. But you can pick it up, and I guarantee you will have a fun time just doing the craziest things. You cycle around delivering pizzas like it's Crazy Taxi. You never know what's going to happen in that game, and it's a true delight. Outside of that, I think I played a lot of games this year, but things I'm looking forward to, there were a couple others. Onimusha was announced at the Game Awards, which was very unexpected. Turok is coming back. Like, there's some crazy things that were announced. So mainly I'm looking forward to the future because I think despite everything happening in the industry, there are a lot of exciting games on the horizon. I don't want to be a meme, but Death Stranding 2 is coming out next year. And even if I'm very busy, I will come back and write a 10,000 word report from MobileSyrup on that game.
Perfect. Somebody's got to.
Somebody's got to.
Well, you're going back to the beach.
That's
Which,
it.
I guess. Yeah.
You want to talk director? I mean, that's what a unique vision that game is.
Did you watch the Conan plays Death Stranding thing that came out recently?
It's
And he's,
so weird for
looking
him
at
to go
himself, and
back.
he's like, what
Yeah.
the hell happened? Who let this happen? Yeah,
It's
really
so
funny.
good because even
Well,
he's like, "What?"
Yeah, he's like, I didn't see this.
With the Like a Dragon thing, just the whole reason it's turn based is because he's a big fan of Dragon Quest, right?
Yeah.
Which I love that. Like that just kind of speaks to the sort of irreverent humor of that series. Everything you're saying is speaking to me. It's again, and like you said, you could probably just jump in with Infinite Wealth, but yeah, I do want to play them all. That's the thing. So
Yeah.
I think next year. I mean, there's a lot of question marks about next year, especially with Nintendo, which I think we're going to get to soon. But
Yeah.
I don't think there's going to be as many games next year, potentially. So maybe that'll be a good time for me to start catching up with. Because I know I'd love them. To your point, like that blend of perfect blend of humor and drama is something that I think Final Fantasy VII does so well.
Yep.
It's partly why it's
For sure.
and even Final Fantasy VI, like some of the best Final Fantasies, they
Love Final
balance that
Fantasy
so well. And so I love everything you're saying about Infinite Wealth. It's like it's speaking to me.
I mean, you hooked me when you said bike missions, so I mean,
Bike missions, dude. There's an entire side quest where you're helping somebody get an education, and so you're like going to this Hawaiian university, but all of the skills are just testing your knowledge on like the most random things. And anytime you pass, there's this one guy who's crushing on the person who's educating you, and you just see him doing this weirdest dance in the background. It cracked me every time. Like it's all these crazy random things. And to your point, Brad, as well, like, yeah, so the main character is so obsessed with Dragon Quest that this is how he pictures the world. And so he goes into this like thing where he pictures himself as the hero, but then Kiryu is in the game and he's the former kind of protagonist of the series. And he doesn't fully buy into this. Like, he goes along with it, but he can break out of it and go into real-time combat because, like, he just...
Amazing.
He doesn't see the world in that way.
Amazing.
Like, everyone else buys into this vision. He's like, this
That's
is dumb.
really cool.
And then he just starts punching people in real time. So it does really, really clever things. It's consistently funny, but it also has really heartfelt moments in a way that I think hit harder because of the contrast. You know, you do have things that are very, very serious, and it deals with a lot of political issues. It's not afraid to shy away from those things, but it does so in a way that is always engaging and entertaining and really. And I don't know. I get very attached to everybody that is in that game, and that they almost have like their own social link system where you go and have drinks at the bar with each individual character. So by the end of that game, when you reach that 10th social link, oh, my heart. Anyways, I will stop talking about Like a Dragon.
Awesome. Yeah, I think Brad hinted at it, but I think the last thing we'll unpack before we sign off today is just the Switch 2 rumors. There's a lot that leaked out in the last 5-6 days. I don't know if you guys have caught up on it. Have you seen anything? Yeah. I think the one standout to me was D-Brand, Canadian company, decided to do the first leak. They were like, we're just going to put out a case. Who knows if it'll actually be the red and blue controllers, but it seems like it's going to be bigger than the first Switch. It's going to have an extra button. And then the follow-up leak is on Reddit. A little more skeptical of this one because apparently the poster has sent private messages to the mods that have proven that they actually have been hands-on with a unit, but they've shown nothing publicly, so we don't really know. But they've got a lot of info, and it seems crazy. I'm trying to think what else. It could be lighter. It's supposed to be bigger. The Joy-Cons are supposed to be magnetic this time, so they just stick onto the sides as opposed to sliding down those rails. That'll be quite interesting to see. And what else? There was another thing. Oh yeah, they were hinting at some sort of they just said there's a really cool feature in the Joy-Cons that they weren't going to share, but they were think lasers. I'm thinking IR. I'm hoping backwards compatibility with the Wii. Bring me Wii options. Let me use the dock as the sensor bar, and I'm
that would be
so
wild.
Hyped. Wouldn't that be sweet though? It's so. There's another theory. People are saying it's a leak, although this is, I'm pretty sure after all the research I did yesterday, it's just a theory where apparently they think the C button stands for connect and that you'll be able to hold the Switch portable in your hand and have the dock connected to your TV and play kind of two screen like the Wii U.
Oh, interesting.
That has been in no way confirmed. Not that any of these have been confirmed, but it's even that leaker did not mention this. This came from, I think, just a fan theory. But if they could do Wii U, DS, Wii back compat all in one system, I would be so psyched. So
Yeah, just to
excited.
be clear for listeners, in case you haven't been following up, because there's been a lot of rumors in the last little while. The only official detail we've gotten about the Switch 2 is that it's backwards compatible. And in typical Nintendo fashion, they made that official announcement the night of the U.S. election. So everyone's doom scrolling.
Yeah, at like
and then
9:45.
Nintendo puts out at like 9:45 p.m. Eastern, that usual, this is Furukawa, the president of Nintendo. We're happy to announce that the Switch the successor to the Nintendo Switch. So that was a smart move because obviously, yeah, if you were buying Switch games in the holidays, you could be rest assured that they're going to carry over. So that was a cool thing to do. But yeah, otherwise, Nintendo, they didn't even formally confirm that they're working on a successor until like May this year, even though obviously we all know that another one was coming. So yeah, and then there was also something you talked about in your story in terms of rumors, but with the number 9.
Oh yeah, the person who did the leaks on Reddit said they had seen pictures of a special edition console that will be available at launch, surrounding a game with the number 9 in the title, which I think everyone is just expecting Mario Kart 9. I mean, I think Mario Kart was like the biggest seller for the first Switch, I'm pretty sure. So to do the sequel makes a lot of sense. I mean, even this is one of the things as one of the maybe we all were those guys, but like of the few guys that actually owned a Wii U, it was a little disappointing that the Mario Kart we got on Switch was just the Wii U version with like extra tracks. And over the years, they did add a lot of extra tracks, which is really fun. But I have been craving like a brand new Mario Kart for a long time.
Well, and one thing that the deluxe version did, which I hope this one builds off of, is having sort of the guest appearances from other characters. Like, why not turn Mario Kart into a surrogate Smash Bros. Like game, right? Like, not even in terms of like big third party guest characters, but like have Pikachu in there, have Samus in there. Like, why not have all these other
should
characters?
Be in there. They're doing like F-Zero courses.
That makes so much sense.
Captain Falcon in there, and it's like, what's going on?
Yeah.
They could have like 10 Fire Emblem characters in there because we know they love to do that. Like,
who do you think's faster, Martha or Roy? Impossible to know. Someday we'll figure it out. But yeah, I think another thing that they mentioned in the rumors was apparently the joysticks are Hall effect, which means that they're run off of magnets to determine which way they're pointing, which should ideally alleviate the drift problem going forward, which I know has been like a huge problem with the Switch. I've gotten lucky. Only one of my Joy-Cons has ever had the problem, but I know, Brad, I think you've been down that road a couple of times. I think Patrick was,
a couple of times, yeah.
Yeah,
the Joy-Con drift, and then also, the like sliding part of it, sliding mechanism is kind of busted, so even if I have a brand new Joy-Con, it doesn't lock in properly. So yeah, hopefully the magnetic setup they have with this one will be a little better. I'll just add on to with the 9 as well. The 9 thing, I can't obviously comment on if the special edition, if it is a special edition hardware, that would probably be Mario Kart. But I saw some people float the possibility. It probably wouldn't get its own special edition system, but there's been for a while now. There's been a lot of rumors about a Final Fantasy IX remake, which is one of the most beloved games in the series. That was part of like Nvidia had that giant leak where they leaked like 30 different things, and pretty much every single one of those things has come out or been revealed yet, except for a Final Fantasy Tactics remaster / remake and a Final Fantasy IX remake. And I think Square has been one of the biggest supporters of Nintendo hardware in the last several years. Like even during the Switch reveal, one of the big games they revealed was Octopath Traveler, and so they've been supporting the Switch with a lot of games. So it wouldn't surprise me if, even if it doesn't get special edition hardware, that's one of like the marquee, if not launch titles, then at least revealed during that showcase, some big game from Square, whether it is the remake of 9 or Tactics or whatever. So
yeah, and then
but that's another big 9 game.
That's true. Not 9 related, but people have a lot of assumptions that probably because Metroid Prime 4 has been announced for so long but not shown,
100%,
that it might also come at launch. Which is, I think
we saw Metroid
Mario
Prime 4.
Kart, Metroid. Did we see?
We did.
Yeah, we saw it.
I thought we just saw the title. We saw more?
No, we actually saw in-engine footage, and it did look better than other Switch games. I mean, I think most people assume it's going to be like Breath of the Wild, right? Where they're not going to betray the people who own a Switch. Yeah, they're not going to abandon the people who own a Switch entirely. They're going to make it cross-gen, which I think makes sense.
Yeah,
I think
especially with
the more interesting thing is that it's been almost the Metroid Prime Remastered launched this year, right? Like early this year, or was that last year?
I think it was
last
early
year.
This year or late. I don't know, but I don't know. That
time doesn't.
But either way, it's
either way,
they only did one of those yet, and 2 and 3 haven't come yet. It was last year. Yes,
saving those for the in-between period. Saving those for when they don't have other games.
Yeah.
So yeah, that'll be
I like to
interesting.
believe that they're saving a Wind Waker remake as well for that same problem, but they
Yes,
just are
Brad.
holding it back.
Yes.
I literally still own a Wii U only for Wind Waker. It's like the only game I ever play on there.
And
Well, yeah,
Twilight Princess too. Like they have that remaster on the Wii
The
U
HD
that
version,
never
yeah.
was brought over, and I am a Twilight Princess defender. I love that game with all my heart. I would pay a lot of money to get that on the Switch.
I paid a lot
Well, yeah,
of money to
it's,
buy it for the Wii U like 3 years ago. It was not cheap to buy that used.
True.
Yeah.
They're in their like remaster era right now, especially this year because this was like the last full year of the Switch, presumably. Like the next game coming out in just a few weeks is Donkey Kong Country Returns
Yeah.
HD,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
like the latest in a
Right.
We
seemingly
even
never
got
ending.
Button
But
Kaitos remasters, which are like the GameCube games that I felt like I talked about for years and no one knew what they were, and that's the Xenoblade Chronicles team, and we even got those both games in a single package. Like they are definitely in their remaster era, and I'm not complaining. I think Nintendo has such a
and
rich
even
catalog.
I
you
think
mentioned
if they add
Xenoblade,
the...
like Xenoblade X is coming as well.
Oh
next year.
man, yeah, I forgot about that. That game is hype.
And that was stranded. Yeah, and that was just stranded on Wii U,
Yeah.
right? So that's a great one to get a re-release.
If they do have the IR capabilities of like something like the Wii, and I know they had similar motion control stuff. They did it on what's that Zelda game that they redid? Skyward Sword that had motion controls, but apparently it was better on the Wii because with the Skyward Sword, when you kept having to hit a button to recenter your sword, whereas on Wii because the IR receiver on the TV would actually connect to it and recenter your sword whenever you actually centered.
Yep.
But if they do have something like that built into the Wii too, which again, this is really skeptical. This is a big reach for me here. But that would like bring on the option for like games like Trauma Center and like other games like that to come back, whether it be remasters or new ones in the series. That's all I'm hoping for.
Trauma Center, Elite Beat Agents. There's a whole bunch of games that are stranded kind of on the early like DS hardware as well that I would love to kind of see brought back.
But if they do that 2-screen thing, that's also rumored more than leaked. I gotta stop making hand gestures. But that will give us the option to bring back, like DS games to. I would assume they would do it Switch Online, but
Yeah,
maybe
I
to
think.
just the store. But like the way they have Switch Online games for Nintendo 64 and a bunch of other retro consoles,
Totally.
giving them the option to bring the DS back. And on top of that, it would be a smart move for Nintendo because it would then maybe potentially fight against all of the stuff that's going on with iPhone this year with all the emulators and Delta and like people playing DS games on their phones. It's like, well, let's bring it back to our own hardware. And
Okay, hear me out.
Yeah.
We were talking about the number 9. A Nintendo DS game that I love was 999.
I know where you're going with that.
9 doors.
Virtue's Last Reward.
Yeah. The sequel was
Yeah.
Virtue's Last Reward, and
Yeah.
there was 3 of those games, and they were all great. They were all from one of the 2 creators of 2Kyo games. The other one was the Danganronpa creator, and then the other one was the 999. If they brought that series back, I would also be extremely excited. Never.
9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors.
That's it. Yeah. You have 9 hours to escape a ship, and if you don't, you will die. And it's like you have so many branching paths you can go down. Super cool game, but again, just talking about kind of being stuck on that hardware. I think you can. I mean, that one's available on 3DS. It might be available in other places, but to see those smaller
but even the
experiences come
3DS
forward.
is in the past now,
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that game because that's made by Chunsoft,
Yep.
and their parent company is Kadokawa, which Sony is trying to buy
That's
right now.
right. That's right.
So, in theory, if that did come out, Sony would be, I guess, indirectly publishing a game on Switch.
That is funny.
Which they just did last month with Horizon, to be fair, which was the first time they did that, Lego Horizon. But yeah, that's just some inside baseball there. Kind of funny.
No, that's cool. But yeah, I'm trying to think what else was interesting on there. I think that apparently, actually, the old Joy-Con, like the existing Switch Joy-Cons, will still work. They won't connect to use in handheld mode, but apparently you'll be able to use them as controllers, like for multiplayer games and stuff, which kind of is that one I'm tending to believe because Nintendo released their own first-party like charging dock for Switch controllers, or for Joy-Cons, first generation Joy-Cons, we'll call them. So that might lead into like them having some foresight for getting that out just ahead of the Switch 2 for people to continue to carry their controllers forward, which would be pretty cool. But yeah, other than that, I think I'm excited for it to be a little bigger, to look a little nicer. I'm hoping, like you said, Brad, I hope that I find the connection of the current Joy-Con on the rails is pretty good, but there still is a bit of like wobble, like a tiny bit of shake there, and I'd love for that to just feel like rock solid on the new one. There was another leak too. This was more of like a render. I don't think this might just be another like fan theory, but people are thinking because the dock is smaller, you'll see like more of the screen when it's docked. And there was like fan theories about like putting a little clock in there and like the weather and like stuff like that kind of on the screen while it's docked. And it was like, well, somebody made one that was like an Animal Crossing character like walking across the top half of the screen. Looked really cute. And I was like, that would be fun, you know? And that's
Yeah.
Nintendo is pretty minimal with the operating system on the Switch 1, so I'd like to see a little more like classic Nintendo charm and like whimsy, you know? Going back to the Wii and the Wii U this year, like the Wii U having like the Mii Plaza just always up there like doing kind of like wacky stuff, and then just the Wii like kind of being like this vintage TV interface where you like click on all these channels. And you know, as much as I like the Switch and how minimal, like how clean it is, I guess I'd like to see a little Nintendo whimsy come back.
Nothing tops the Wii Shop channel theme.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So good.
That's iconic.
And all of them, like the weather channel had its own music, like everything. I think, yeah, Brad. Well,
the Wii music was elite.
Yeah, that's it. Like Bennett, I think your idea there of leaning more into the Nintendo personality. They have so much charm to their products, and you're right. I think that the Switch was a wise correction from the Wii U of making it feel like a premium product. And now I think they can do both, where they have such a strong grounding, bring back that personality, and I think it'll make a lot of people happy. I mean, I think even in the Animal Crossing perspective, New Horizons was such a big hit for them, and it's now one of their biggest franchises, which it wasn't really before. It was popular. It was always popular, but if they can lean into that more of that like personality that they bring, I think that would be such a smart play.
How do you guys feel about the report saying that it's just going to be an LCD screen as opposed to being OLED at launch, which I assume means they will do an OLED one down the line. But as three guys who I assume would rather OLED rather than over LCD at launch and would be willing to pay more for it right off the hop.
Yeah.
It is a bit disappointing to be like, oh, wait, like now I have to buy a Switch, use it for 2 years, sell it, and buy another Switch 2 years down the line or something. I mean, I assume the LCD screen will be better than the existing one, but still the OLED just on anything is so much crisper. And I think for games that can be so, especially Nintendo games that are so vibrant and like colorful, it really works well.
I mean, on my side, yeah, I would obviously definitely prefer the OLED. Any device that I've had that has had an OLED, like I think about the PlayStation Vita, that screen holds up to this day. I think it still looks great. So I would much prefer that as an option on day one. Knowing Nintendo, they tend to hold out on that stuff. Like I even think about the 3DS again. You had the base 3DS, then you had the 3DS XL, then you had the 3DS. No, the new 3DS.
New Nintendo 3DS.
That's right. Yeah. So I mean, they tend to take the iterative approach. I guess to avoid some level of confusion. The 2DS, my God, I forgot about that too. So
that's all I have. I have two regular 2DSs and a 2DS XL.
That's so funny.
I never really got. I used to have a 3DS XL, but I never got into the 3D gimmick that much.
Right.
And then, for some reason, I just think the 2DS looks super cool. I like love it. It's like Game Boy Advance on steroids. You can use it to like jam a door open. It's like got it all going for it.
It's such
and then
a
the
unique
2DS
design.
XL, when I was like hacking consoles back earlier this year, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna get one so I have like a really good one. And I found like some dude in like Markham that had like one that was barely used. They had like screen protectors on it and everything. It was
Heck
sick.
yeah.
So
I don't know. Like I feel their designs are fairly iconic. They hold up pretty well. Maybe the Wii U is the exception there, only because of the build quality. It kind of feels like a little
it
cheap.
does feel cheap, but the Wii U gamepad is surprisingly comfortable to use.
It is. Absolutely.
It's so light that it's like and like big. It's like good to grip.
Totally.
It's weirdly comfortable to use. I like using the gamepad more than I like the Wii U Pro controller. I don't know if that's controversial or not, but I found the Pro controller and the Wii U also felt really cheap.
Yeah.
So at least the gamepad felt like a little more heft and a little more comfortable.
I don't know that I've ever used the Wii U
surprising
Pro controller. I've used
Pardon?
the Switch Pro controller. Sorry, not the Switch. The Wii Pro controller. Was it the same one? Do we know?
No, because the Wii one was one that kind of like looked like a evolved version of like a mishmash of like an SNES gamepad with like GameCube arms on it.
Yeah.
The Wii U one was like it looks like a beta for the Switch one. Honestly,
interesting.
It's like really it's more angular than the Switch one. The Switch one is good. I like that.
I like the Switch one a lot.
Yeah, the Wii U one was.
Oh,
whatever.
that's so interesting. Yeah, I don't think I ever, unfortunately, used the Wii U one. But yeah, I think just overall, I would
count yourself lucky.
Go back to the OLED. I would prefer that. I won't be surprised if they don't have it. I think they're trying to. I think part of the rumors for why it's taken them so long is they've had a lot of the stuff ready to go, and it was just supply issues. And so I wonder if that has also been part of it, if they couldn't secure parts or whatever that might be. So maybe just getting as many of the LCD devices out there as possible is part of the play. But yeah, obviously, I'm with you. I would love to get an OLED version of it because they just do look so much better, and you even get things like battery life. So much of that is tied to the device screen. So yeah,
that actually leads into a good question. Do you think the new one, by nature of just being bigger, will have more battery life, but will also expect it to be more powerful? So there's going to be like a what is the Switch battery life right now? Like 6 hours at peak?
Yeah, I think it's around 6 hours. It depends on what you're playing, obviously. I have gotten a little bit more than 6 hours out of some games. And then obviously, if you're playing Tears of the Kingdom, you're looking at probably like 3-ish?
Yeah, Nintendo's official website says approximately 4.5 to 9 hours. Okay. So yeah, huge range there, depending on the game.
I would hope that it gets more battery life because I actually think that's probably their biggest advantage right now over something like a Steam Deck. You know, out of all of the competing devices, which are obviously aiming at a higher target because they're playing PC games, I think the Switch's advantage is that it is a more on-the-go device. Like I have a Steam Deck sitting right back there. I actually use it all the time, whether I'm streaming PS5 games or whatever when I'm traveling and all of that good stuff. It is a great device, but it's not small. It does not have the battery life to actually be a portable device. So I think this is like the Game Boy. You know, their advantage over the Sega competitor back in the day was just that it had a super long battery life.
Yeah, that's true.
Going off Nintendo's history, do you think that they'll be like the chip that they'll be using will be a few years older? Do you think it will compete more squarely with something like the Steam Deck or the ROG Ally?
I would probably toss that back your way. I feel like this is more your realm. Like, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm expecting it to be like a older chip. I think as much as people really want Nintendo to be competing with all these handhelds that like Xbox and Sony and Steam or Valve are like making, not Xbox and Sony ones are like rumored for the future. But I think as much as Nintendo was like, or people want Nintendo to have like the power of the PS4 in your hand, I don't think Nintendo cares. They're like, we are just making games, and like we saw how much they did. They did an amazing amount with what was packed into the first Switch. So I don't see them prioritizing that as much as what you were saying, like prioritizing battery life and just portability. As much as I would love them to be able to push it further, the report we got also said that when docked, it might do 4K 30 frames per second.
Right.
But 4K 30 is like the bottom of the range for what you would want to game on.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if we see more like 1440p games at like slightly higher frame rate, which I think is fine. When you're on the TV and you're sitting like, more than 6-7 feet away, 1440p looks really crisp still. And obviously we've but we've lived through the 1080p Nintendo era, so any jump above that would be really nice.
Well, and I mean to that as well, I think about the PS4 era. Like if we are kind of looking at that as a comparison, back then we kind of had checkerboarding as a way to reach 4K, and now we just have better solutions. We have things like TSR, DLSS, like the upscaling.
Well, I think they used NVIDIA processor in the first Switch, so DLSS would probably be the one. And I think out of all the ones that I've tried, DLSS seems to be
for sure
the cleanest upscaling method right
Definitely.
now.
So if they're only targeting 30 frames per second for games that are reaching 4K and they have DLSS, I think that's achievable on older hardware. And also to your point, like they're not going to be creating games that look like the next Horizon. That's never been their kind of angle. The only games that really, really push kind of, I think, the hardware as hard as they can go on the Nintendo side are things like Zelda, which are doing it for a very clear purpose, and then things like Xenoblade. That's a series that really needs the scale to tell the kind of stories they're doing. And sure, like the new Metroid Prime, I think Metroid Prime 4, from what we've seen of it, is stellar. It looks fantastic. It looks very close to the remaster of Prime. If you've seen that, Bennett, like that, it's very close to that. Just more advanced, I would say. And I think, on better hardware, it can really push what they're doing. But it isn't part of the Nintendo philosophy. They're going to be gameplay first every single time, and it keeps their development costs down. Like when we're talking about these $300 million Sony costs of their games, if Nintendo, their premier game probably being Tears of the Kingdom is probably their highest budget game, if I had to wager a guess, because of the development time that went into it and just like the physics behind it. It probably is still a fraction of what Last of Us 2 cost. It just graphically smaller team. They tend to keep their experiences much tighter. So I don't think they necessarily need a chip that is going to push to 4K 60.
No, yeah, exactly right. And you brought the two games that you mentioned are perfect examples, like Tears of the Kingdom and Xenoblade. Like they'll both have very stylized art styles. Like
Right.
Xenoblade is very anime, and Zelda's just sort of like watercolor, cel shaded sort of prettiness. And yeah, that's the sort of focus on the graphics, so that yeah, like you said, they can emphasize innovating with the technology and doing more interesting things with that. So yeah, it's never been Nintendo's MO to push graphical fidelity. They've always gone for more stylized art styles that are more timeless in that sense. And to your point, I don't like, all these other companies doing handheld systems. Like Nintendo's not really competing with them. Nintendo doesn't really compete with PlayStation even, right? Like they're kind of their own thing. Like they haven't for a long time, really. It was really PlayStation and Xbox were sort of the more direct competitors, because Nintendo's always sort of done its own thing, at least in the last couple generations. So I don't expect Nintendo to really look too much at what the other like handheld PCs are doing.
There is one thing that I would toss to both of you, and the reason that the Switch has also been so successful, coming out of the Wii U, there was no third-party support. And one of the big things with the Switch early on was indie developers finding success on the Switch. I think about SteamWorld Dig 2 was one of the early ones that blew up on the Switch. Do you think that if the chip is not powerful enough, fewer third parties will be able to support the Switch? Maybe not on the indie side, but we've even gotten Doom Eternal on the Switch, which is crazy. And because the install base is so high, they want to be there.
You can stream. What was that? What's that Remedy game?
Oh, Control.
Yeah, like you can stream Control on the Switch, which I think is crazy.
Right.
But yeah,
I would be curious
to
to know like sales data, like how well did those games sell on Switch? Because my inclination is a lot of them probably wouldn't have sold that well on Switch, because I feel like the average person who owns a Switch isn't interested in a lot of those games to begin with. Like the average person who owns a Switch probably for the first party games, right? Do they care about Doom Eternal, especially if it's years later? Like, again, I could be very wrong on that, but it is cool from a technical perspective to see these porting studios try to work within the confines of the Switch. But yeah, my general feeling is people don't care necessarily about those big budget, graphically intensive third-party exclusive. Third-party support is important, but more so, I think, in the sense of, we're going to partner with Square Enix, and they're going to make Octopath Traveler for us, where it's a very stylized game. It's beautiful, like HD 2D. That really started a trend. If you know, 7 years later, we've gotten tons of remakes in that style. But
Eiyuden
I think that's probably more along. Yeah, I think that's more along the lines of what we would get from third-party support, and because the install base presumably is going to be really big, like publishers would be willing to make those sorts of second-party deals or whatever you want to call them. I think that would be more important in terms of like working with third parties than necessarily, we got to bring Alan Wake 2 to Switch or Switch 2, or we got to bring Baldur's Gate 3 to Switch 2 sort of thing.
It'll be interesting to see how third-party devs tweet it in like sort of a PS5 Pro context. Like, for me, a lot of those third-party games like Red Dead Redemption and The Witcher, Witcher 3 being on Switch are like, I always wanted to buy them because I'm like, that'd be really fun to have that game on the go. I love that game.
Mm-hmm.
But I have that on my computer and I have that on my Xbox, and it looks so much better over there.
Yeah.
Do I really want to spend the full price of the game, or even like, discounted down to $50 on a game that's going to look like generationally worse to play the same game? And I think on The Witcher you might be able to cloud save, but I don't think on Red Dead you could cloud save over. So it's like, if you could cloud save, I might be more into it. But it would be interesting to see if like something like those games, when they Switch 2 gets announced, if they're like, we've updated them sort of on like a PS5 Pro patch, where it's like now it runs at 1080p and the draw distance is much further and the textures are a little crisper, and maybe that would draw people more into the third-party zone. But I think the root of your question being like, will indies come over? I think so. I think the indies and Switch and Nintendo now go like so hand in hand that people are just, like Brad said, the install base makes it worthwhile for an indie to be on Switch. Will we see more like big game third-party support? I don't know. I'd like to. I think that would be cool. It would be awesome if I could just like find the Switch as my one main console going into 2026. The Switch 2 is my main console going into 2026, but I don't know if I expect it to have that big of a splash. But I'm still hyped for all the first-party Nintendo games.
Do we have an idea of when we think it's going to release next year?
Yeah, so the rumor says like announced in January, released in the spring, probably around March.
Okay, so
which
similar
lines up
to
with
this
my
first
birthday.
Switch.
Yeah.
Okay.
But who knows,
Yeah.
Again, this leak is, as much as it seems like semi-confirmed, there's a lot of info here and it's hard to tell. But that being said, if there is a January announcement coming, that would mean that, things like this would be starting to get into more and more hands, which generally leads towards links. I think my last question for you guys is, the leak says that Switch 2 is the name. Do you think that that's the best name for it? Throwing out like Super Nintendo Switch, Switch Advance, the new Switch.
I'm of two minds on that. I feel like from a business perspective, it's the simplest name that conveys to the average person walking into a store or shopping on Amazon what it is. I think that's so. Yeah. I think in that sense, it serves its name well. As a gaming nerd, I would like Super Nintendo Switch.
That'd be so good.
It just fits so well. But again, we run into that issue where the Wii U. Yeah. So many people didn't know what that was. They thought it was like an expansion of the Wii. So it's like
the U aspect made like 0 sense to anyone.
Yeah,
so I don't even know what that means 10 years later.
But yeah, like if someone, the average person who, because gamers are a lot younger than definitely. Younger, like will they know what Super Nintendo Switch or something or whatever the sort of nomenclature they want to use there. So I feel like the safest route is probably just to go Nintendo Switch 2. I think that just it's simple. It's the next iteration. It's the sequel. But yeah, it would be fun to kind of see them be creative with the name. So I don't know.
It'd be cool. It'd be cool to have like a I think the PS5 30th anniversary where like they had the classic colors.
Yeah,
it'd be cool to do some switches like that.
For
Give
sure.
me like a gray with purple buttons, or even like the Super Famicom had the like rainbow, like red, green, yellow.
Yeah, they played
buttons.
around with Joy-Con
awesome.
colors a little bit in terms of like the base shell, but they didn't really release many Switch units that had interesting designs on the back or anything. Like, sure, the dock did, but I feel like they could definitely go further with unique colors and all of that stuff on the new one.
It actually, in the leaks, it did seem to suggest that, well, in the previous Switch 1, the Joy-Cons were always colorful, but the Switch was usually just black. Like sometimes it would have something on it, but it usually was black and it didn't really match with the Joy-Cons you bought it with. Like if you had an OLED, you would get like white Joy-Cons and like a black Switch still. And it did seem to suggest that in the new one, the body of the Switch would more accurately match the colors of the Joy-Cons that you bought it with, which I think would be cool and hopefully leads to like more design ethos on the special edition units.
People will buy special designs. They will spend money.
I mean,
to get
that Animal
second,
Crossing one
third.
like sold out 1,000 times, and they just kept bringing it back.
Totally,
it's crazy.
Totally. So I think it's a smart business move on their part as well.
Cool. But yeah, I think we've been chatting for too long. Although it was really great to unpack all this stuff. I had a blast, and it was really great having you guys on. But yeah, Chris, do you want to tell people where they can find you online and how they can stay in touch?
Absolutely. You can find me on MobileSyrup occasionally, and otherwise I exist in the cloud. So that's where you can find me.
Do you have any social media you're active on?
I don't have any social media. You can find me on PlayStation at CB was taken. There you go.
That's fun. Cool.
Yeah, I guess that's the perfect segue. If Dean was here, he would have said, "You're Chris Brown, but not the singer."
That's true.
We never said that.
Yeah, no, it never happened.
In case there was any confusion, after an hour and a half, you're not the singer.
No, amazingly, no.
But you can sing. You're just not the singer.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
I would imagine you could sing quite well.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, you can find my work on
mobile. Anthem. You can lead us.
Yeah, of course, you can find my work on MobileSyrup.com. I'm on all the social media platforms as well. Still on Twitter, though not as much. Trying to do Blue Sky more. We just hit over 1,000 followers on Blue Sky, the MobileSyrup account, which is awesome to see. So we're getting some traction there. So yeah, please follow us there as well. I don't know when we're going to be publishing this, but likely by the time it's live, I'll have a few features up from the Game Awards. Cool. I did some interviews and previews and hands-on stuff. So yeah, and then our top 10 games of the year list will be going up soon as well. So yeah, stay tuned for all that.
Cool. And of course, I'm Brad Bennett. You can find me pretty much anywhere at the Brad Fad across all social medias. I did end up making a Blue Sky after last week's episode when John really talked me into it. I haven't posted anything or used it yet, but I'll get there. The one thing I would say, obviously follow Mobile Syrup everywhere at Mobile Syrup, but make sure you follow our Instagram. Jeannie and I are going to CES at the start of January, and our plan is really to push short form video a lot harder than we have been. So I think on Instagram would be the easiest way to find that. We'll try to get it on YouTube Shorts and TikTok as well, but I think Instagram right now is like our number one focus, just as we're trying to like figure out some like more production strategies rather than like social strategies. So if you want to see a lot of the CES coverage that I think is going to be behind the scenes style and just more interesting like quick looks at gadgets and stuff that we see, definitely check us out there. And then, yeah, obviously the Blue Sky account's going up, and Mobile Syrup is all around. Check out the website. Tons of cool stuff. Brad, like you said, tons of awesome features from gaming. Like he was in LA twice in the past like 7 days, so he's got like 18 features in the loader or in the hopper ready to go. And then a lot of us will just have some smaller scale stuff over the holidays. I think if anybody cares, the Mobile Syrup earbud toque test is going to probably come out sometime a little bit before New Year's, just at the end of December. So, keep your ears peeled for the best earbuds that fit under a toque. And I think that's all I've got. But yeah, thank you guys for coming on. This is awesome. And that's it.
Nice. All right, let me hit stop here and just hold on for 1 sec before hopping off the call. If you guys